Hi, I'm Shawna.
And I'm Liz.
Welcome to Getting Bookish, a weekly podcast where we will talk about different book-related topics, let you know what we're reading, and even answer Q&As from you.
Be sure to visit our website, gettingbookish.com, and check us out on Facebook and Instagram at Getting Bookish. If you enjoy our podcast, we'd love for you to subscribe and leave us a rating and review, which helps us to be seen by other book lovers.
With all that said, we hope you'll enjoy Getting Bookish with us.
Enjoy the podcast.
Hi, friends. We are back with this month's Bookish Brief. We had so much fun discussing the books we are reading, the books we have read, and the books we're looking forward to last month that we're back again to do it this month. So last month I was in the middle of reading two books. The first one was Novice, and I talked a lot about it in our last Bookish Brief, if I can say the words. And it's a great book, like if you have, especially for a boy who maybe doesn't love to read, it's a pretty exciting adventure story, and the end was really fun. It definitely makes you want to continue in this series. I probably won't, just because I wasn't that into the story necessarily, but it was a good book. I gave it 4 stars out of 5, so that means I enjoyed it. I've been trying to be stingier with my stars this year, so 4 stars out of 5 is a pretty great review from me. And so I definitely enjoyed that one. And then the other book that I finished that I was reading last time was Girl Wash Your Face by Rachel Hollis. And this was not the first time I read it, but this time I listened to it on audio, which was super fun. I think, especially with nonfiction, when you get to listen to the author read the book aloud to you, it's just that much better. And so it was really fun. I kind of listened to it slowly, and so I did finally finish it, but it's always a good challenge for me to be like, oh yeah, I'm supposed to be doing the things. And so I enjoyed listening to that book again, well, reading it again, but listening to it for the first time. So those were the books that I finished this month that I was reading during our last Bookish Brief. What did you finish this month?
Well, I also was in the middle of 2. The first one was The Lost Girls by Heather Young, and I believe this is her debut novel. And it was great. It's not a book that I typically read. It's kind of that mystery, like a thriller maybe. I don't know. What would you consider a thriller? Like a death happens somewhere?
Yeah, like maybe fast-paced storytelling.
Yeah. So maybe not that.
I don't know. I think we need a definition.
Well, it's
a genre definition for
right?
thriller, but
it's a multi-generational book, so you're hearing it from different generations' point of views, and it's just about this little girl that goes missing, and then at 6 years old, she disappears into the woods. They never find her again. And then it's all about finding out what really happened to her. And I thought it was a fantastic book, and I would definitely recommend it. I loved it. The other one that I finished was Julie Bogart's The Brave Learner, and that's one of my homeschool books that I like to read, but I don't recommend it just for homeschooling moms. I recommend it to any mom in general, or anybody who has influence over children, because it's a great way to learn how to teach the way children learn. And I love that. Instead of just thinking, well, they should know this and we need to teach it this way. Children, the mind of a child is such a playground. And if you can teach them in a joyful, fun way and in an interactive way, because each child learns a different way. And so to really kind of understand that, I think you can reach children a lot easier. So I loved that book. And like you were saying with Rachel Hollis, if you get the audio one, Julie reads it herself. And so again, that's also really fun to hear the author read their book. But I love it. 5 stars, hands down. So those were the 2 that I finished. Now we're going to jump back to Liz. And so we now are going to start talking about the books that we've read this past month after these 2 that we finished from our last Bookish Brief. So get ready, because there have been a lot of books read.
There's something about this last month. Sometimes I'm in these reading ruts where I struggle to find a book that I'm enjoying or whatever it is. That was not the case this month. I have lots of, this isn't like lists of books that I've read, but including the 2 that I finished, I read 21 books.
That is insane.
It is insane. And it almost, I feel almost embarrassed saying that out loud.
No, that's fantastic.
I should have been doing other things with my time.
If anywhere you should not feel embarrassed, it's here. That's just
right.
So exciting. I'm excited because I talk to you almost every day, and I'm sure I still don't hear all the books that you've read. I hear bits and pieces, so I'm excited to see which ones I didn't even know you were reading.
All right. Well, this first one is actually probably one I didn't tell you about. It's a graphic novel, and I don't have a physical copy to show you because I got it as a digital advanced reader copy, and it's called Vincent. So he's a teddy bear, but he's like a late teens, early 20s boy who's socially awkward, and he likes this girl, and so it's about just being socially awkward with his friends and in his life. And graphic novels are not my go-to reading books. And I didn't really like this one, not so much because it was a graphic novel, but because I couldn't figure out who the intended audience was. It wasn't inappropriate, but he's much too old of a character to appeal to middle schoolers. But he's a teddy bear. And so I'm just like, what's this book for?
Yeah. So
anyway, I gave it 2 stars. I did not. It wasn't my favorite book by far that I read this month. But the next book I read is Blood Witch by Susan Dennard. So this is the 3rd book in the Witchlands series, which I love this series. This one was a little lacking for me. I feel like sometimes with a long fantasy series, there will be like a book that's just like filler between 2 giant plot points. Mm-hmm. And that's what this one felt like to me. So even though the first 2 books, I gave them both 5 stars, this one was more of a 3-star read for me. And I know that's kind of an unpopular opinion because a lot of my friends read it and were like, this is a 5-star book. And I'm like, we did not read the same book. It's not a 5-star book. Not that one. So the next book I read, another YA fantasy. It was called Ace of Shades. I listened to it on audio. It is a super fun book. It's pretty fast-paced about this girl who is searching for her mother, and it kind of takes place in a Victorian kind of era, except for it's different. It's not our Victorian era. It's a different world's Victorian era. And so she gets off the ship, and immediately lots of things go wrong, and she gets involved with this street gang kind of right from the beginning. And so it's a pretty fun, fast-paced read. So it's called Ace of Shades. It's by Amanda Foodie. I'm guessing at that pronunciation. And I gave it 4 stars. It was a fun, fast read, and I hadn't heard of it before, but I got the 2nd book in the series as an advanced reader copy, and it actually comes out, that book comes out today. And it was, so I was like, I started it, and I was like, I feel like I'm missing something. And I'm like, oh, right, the first book.
The first book.
That's why I read that one, and it was really good. So I was glad that I came across it in that way. The next book I read, we actually talked about last month, Daisy Jones and the Six, which this was a book I got from Book of the Month Club. So this was one of my challenge books for the year because I'm trying to read more diversely. This book is very different from what I normally read. It's very gritty. It's very poignant. It's really good. Like, if you like a book that's focused on like character development, you're really gonna enjoy Daisy Jones and the
I've
Six.
heard a lot of people say that they love it.
Yeah, it was so good. I started it in book form, and then I was busy working, and I was like, oh, I want to be reading right now, but I'm doing stuff. And so I switched over to the audio, and the audio was full cast, and it's amazing. It's amazing. I'm so addicted to full cast audio right now. So the next one I read was another kind of disappointing
Oh, no.
novel. And I don't know if I'm just feeling really picky this month because I read so many titles or what it was, but this was another one that everybody had talked about. It was getting reviewed everywhere. I had actually gotten a preview for the first 5 chapters, and they were so good. I was so excited about this book. I got it in 2 different subscription boxes last month, so I actually have 2 copies.
Oh.
I own 2 copies of this book, and I did not like it. The first 5 chapters were definitely the best part of the book. I'm not going to go into why I didn't like it because I feel like that discussion gets really spoilery really quick.
Oh, okay.
But
It's a beautiful cover.
it is. And the other one, this is actually a special edition. I don't have the other one in here. The other one is blue instead of red. It's a very interesting premise. It's these 4 queens that kind of co-rule. They all live in the same castle, but they're ruling 4 kingdoms.
Mm-hmm.
And they all die, and they have to figure it out. Thus the title of the book, 4 Dead Queens. That was super not a spoiler, but it lacked something for me. I gave it 2 stars. I read it all the way through. It just wasn't. 2 stars is a low rating for a book I finished. So I tried really hard. I really wanted something like epic to happen at the end. I won't go into it, but 2 stars. I'm feeling brutal this month. What can I say?
I know. I love it though.
So the next book I read, I listened to the audio for The Bookshop by Penelope Fitzgerald. It was one of those books where I didn't have anything on audio, and so I just kind of scrolled through what my library had available for checkout. And I saw it, and I was like, oh, I like to read about bookish things, so I want to read The Bookshop. And it was actually published in 1978, and it won an award or a couple of awards. And the tagline, I'm going to read it so I don't mess this up. A town that lacks a bookshop isn't always a town that wants one.
Oh.
And so I know.
Well, I don't want to live in that town then.
Right. But it's just this really kind of cute story about this semi-retired woman opens this bookshop. She has like this nest egg, and she decides that this is the thing she wants to do, and it just doesn't really fly. And it was like, it's maybe not the most encouraging book ever if you want to open a bookstore, but it was just this really sweet story. I really enjoyed it. I didn't think I was going to, but again, it's just not the kind of book I typically read because it's more contemporary fiction.
I was just going to say, that's what it sounds like. Like a cozy novel. Like,
yeah, and it was definitely, I would definitely say it was like a cozy read, and I just really enjoyed the characters and the setting, and so that was definitely a 4-star book for me. I super enjoyed it. And
I like how you look shocked.
Right. And I think that's the thing, is that I had read so many books like this where I thought I was gonna love it, and then was like completely let down. Mm-hmm. That when I like started listening to that one, I'm like, this is so fun. I evidently no longer know how to choose books for myself. That's the moral of this last month. All right, so the next one, we are back to YA fantasy. This is the second book in this series, The Heart Forger by Rin, I think it's Geppetto. The first one is The Bone Witch. The first one I enjoyed. I gave it 4 stars. This one I also enjoyed. It just, I mean, this is a hefty book. It's not a short novel, but it could have been.
Oh.
So there were parts that just felt a tiny bit long in this one.
Yeah.
It has this super gorgeous cover. I don't know if you
yeah.
guys can see like all that metallic scroll work. It's really, really beautiful. So, I mean, it was good. It wasn't the best thing I've ever read. I gave it 3 stars. I feel very official reviewing my books and being like, this is a 3-star book. So now comes this next book.
Oh, no.
If you have read this book and you loved it, you probably don't want to listen to what I have to say. This book was horrific. And I don't mean like I didn't enjoy it. I mean, I was actually like cringing and felt icky while reading it.
Say the name of it for our listeners if they're just listening.
It's Damsel by Elena K. Arnold. It was a National Book Award finalist.
Oh.
I got it in a subscription box.
The cover is gorgeous.
It's gorgeous.
The
description is fantastic. It's like what happens after the damsel is saved from the dragon. Like, there's a dragon, there's a prince, he comes and rescues the damsel, and then what happens afterward, which is a premise like I was all in for this book. Again, I don't know how to choose books for myself, evidently. I was so ready to love this, and it's so cringy. For the first like 3 chapters, she's not clothed, and she's with this prince who evidently also does not feel the need to give her clothes to wear. I mean, it's just it's like uncomfortable thing after uncomfortable thing. There is some abuse that happens. There's just lots of cringy things that made me very uncomfortable. Personally, I actually blogged about this, that I think this book needs a trigger warning because...
Yeah, because that's YA, right?
Yeah, it's YA. But it was a lot. Yeah. It was a very heavy book. I did not finish this one. I was 21% of the way through it. And I was like, I just can't read this. So I didn't. I gave it 0 stars. Which you can't even do. In Goodreads, you have to give it 1 star. So my Goodreads review has 1 star. My mind says it has 0. I know that there are people who read it and loved it and were like, it's this wonderful work of feminist fiction, and I struggled to see that. So I felt like at this point in the month, I was like, I no longer know what I like to read. And I'm surprised I kept reading. I'm surprised I read this many books this month, having had so many letdowns.
Right.
However, I did continue. So the next book I read, I was actually a reread because I was like, I need to read something I actually know I like. So I reread King's Cage. Well, I listened to it actually, by Victoria Aveyard. It is the 3rd book in the Red Queen series, and I am getting ready to read the last book in that series, and so I wanted to kind of remember what was going on. So that was a reread for me. If you have read that series, I am totally Team Maven. If you haven't read that series, that literally means nothing to you. But it was a fun reread. I didn't change. I have 4 stars on the review. I didn't change the amount of stars that I gave it, but it was just like, I need like a palate cleanser.
Yeah. A little sorbet.
Yeah. And so then a friend of mine recommended these books because I've been trying to read more diversely. And so she recommended some science fiction books, which I typically don't read. Science fiction is not my go-to. Mm-hmm. I listened to the first 2 books in the series so far, and they're also full cast, which I love. The first book, it's so much fun. The computer, the artificial intelligence, is a character in the story, which was just so fascinating to me. I was like, oh, the computer's its own character. But I actually brought, this is the bookstore copy of the book, actually, but I had to bring it to show you guys, because I listened to it, but I wanted you, like, if you're watching,
that is
see
cool.
the format. It's like a compilation of different briefs and different audio recordings.
Oh, that's
interesting.
And that's like
how the book is put together. And it was so, like, it was amazing to listen to, but I actually think in retrospect now it would have been so fun
to read
because it's very visual.
Yeah, very unique.
And and so I really enjoyed it. So I've listened to the first one, which is this one, Illuminae, and then the second one, Gemina, which is the second book in the series, but very similar to this one. So I gave the first one 5 stars. I gave the second one.
Oh,
I know, it's a 5-star book. Yay!
Wow, and it's a science fiction or science fiction. I
think that the moral of this story is I should break out of my comfort zone more frequently. But I gave Gemina 4 stars just because it felt so similar to Illuminae in a lot of ways. And then I think the third one is Olympia. And I'm waiting for my turn for that one to come off of hold. So I haven't read that one yet. But those were amazing. And again, if your kids, like if you are recommending books to like middle schoolers or teenagers and they maybe don't love to read, or they really prefer to read graphic novels, I think that these books being so visual would be a really fun read for them. All right, so the next one I read, again, okay, so I get 4 Bookish subscription boxes.
That's hilarious.
Which is an excessive number. But 2 of them I got, what was the other book? Oh, 4 Dead Queens. So 2 of them I got that one. And then in the other 2, I got this book.
Oh.
This is Wicked Saints by Emily A. Duncan. And the funniest thing is that I also got an advanced reader copy of this. It was a digital copy, but I had already read it when both of these books came.
Oh my goodness.
I read this book, and it's been reviewed, and people have loved it, and it's had like all the positive press, and it's like, this is the #1 YA fantasy of the year. And I feel like at some point I'm going to learn that when someone says that, it's not true. Or don't get your hopes up so high or something. So I read the whole book and I was like, did I like miss something while I was reading this?
Isn't that frustrating?
Yeah.
You want to jump on the like wagon of hurrah, and you're like,
I love it too. And so like I finished the book and I went in to do my review, and I was like, I'm going to review it a little more generously because I feel like it's me. Like I'm reading it in a digital way, so I'm reading it on a screen. That's not my preferred reading format. It was me. I read the book wrong. Was essentially what I was thinking when I wrote my review. And so I was pretty generous in my review, and I originally gave it 4 stars. And then a couple of my friends reviewed it, and they were like, I think I missed something. And I was like, oh, okay, I wasn't the only one that felt that way. So then I went back and I re-reviewed it, and I gave it 3 stars. It was a great book. I just, with so much positive press, like this one girl, she's like, this book, people have loved it so much, I thought it was going to cure cancer. Like, that's how much people have like been talking about how great this book is. And she's like, and it didn't. And I was like, I did this wrong. I read this wrong. And so it was a great book. It just, I got all tied up. I had there was way too much expectation. Yeah. I think. Okay, so I have a few books left. This one, you guys, I've talked about this book so many times since we started doing the podcast, and I finally read it.
Please tell me you liked it.
So good.
Good.
So good. So it's been compared a lot to 6 of Crows, And
what is the name of
very
it for
similar.
our listeners?
This is, I know, I was just thinking that. Sorry, listeners, I forget. It's The Gilded Wolves by Shawna Can. Ooh, I'm sure I'm pronouncing that wrong. I am so sorry. And it's about this group of friends who kind of take on this impossible heist, and everything that could go wrong does go wrong. And I loved the characters. I was so in it for all of these characters. It was so good. And it is, the criticism that it's gotten is that it's very similar to Six of Crows. And it is very similar to Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo. But that didn't take away from the fact that it's a fantastic book. And yes, 5 stars. All the stars.
Yay!
All the stars for The Gilded Wolves. I know. I was on a roll at the end of the month. So then after reading that one, I had to reread Six of Crows. And so I actually listened for the first time to Six of Crows by Leigh Bardugo and the second book, which is Crooked Kingdom. But I do talk a lot about those books on one of our previous podcasts, so I'm not going to go into all of that. But when we talked about how to review a book, that was one of the books that I used as an example. So if you guys haven't heard that one, check out our podcast on how to review books, because I talk about it a lot. All right, so then I had another did not finish book. Okay. American Gods by Neil Gaiman. I love Neil Gaiman. He's amazing. American Gods, I guess I should back up a little bit. I've read everything he's written for children. American Gods was fantastic. I was 45% of the way through it when I was like, I need to read this later. Is essentially what I'm thinking. It's very graphic, but not just in one way. It's not just like, oh, it's sexually graphic. It is, but it's also really violent, and it's also like, just if someone's sick, like that description is graphic. It's just graphic in a lot of ways. And I was like, I'm not enjoying it. Like every time I sat down to listen to it, I was like, oh, I'm only 45% of the way through. It's a massive book. And I was like, I've never been one that's like, oh, you have to finish a book. Like, I'm very happy to put things on my DNF shelf. And that was just one that I was like, I might read it later. I really do enjoy Neil Gaiman, but I wasn't going to finish it this month.
Yeah.
So that one, I mean, I gave it 3 stars because, like I said, it's a good book.
Yeah.
It was just a lot. And maybe after reading Damsel, I just couldn't do another one.
I'm very sensitive to anything like that.
I'm feeling a little sensitive this month. So then I read, now thinking about it right now makes me want to take a drink. I'm not even kidding. This book is called Dry, and it's by Neil and Jared Shusterman. And Neil Shusterman he writes a lot of YA books. Dry is it's kind of a dystopian novel about what happens if there's no more water. I finished it in 2 days, and I drank so much water in those 2 days because everything in the book is like this description essentially of being thirsty. And I'm like, give me more water, give me more water. It was such a fun book, a super quick read. I would say that even though it's a YA novel, it's definitely like middle schoolers, middle grade, even like 4th, 5th grade would enjoy it. The characters felt a little bit young, which was kind of my only criticism in the book, is that reading, I would have said that the characters were like 13 or 14, but they were really like 16, 17. And so the book just felt like it was geared to a younger audience than I expected going in. But it was a super good read. The last 2. Ooh, I'm to the last 2. Oh my goodness. You back. Can you read too many books in a month? I feel like I did. The Library of Ever, which was another advanced reader copy that one. Also comes out today. It's by Zeno Alexander. It is a middle grade book, and it was so fun. If you have like third, fourth, fifth graders who enjoy going to the library, this book, the girl goes to the library and she finds this secret passage. And like, what could be more amazing than finding a secret passage inside of your library? And like, even as an adult, like, there were so many funny parts. They're at the library because her nanny is like, oh, I need to go check out a book so that I can impress my lunch date. And I'm like, that's hilarious. Like, who does that? Evidently this girl's nanny. But it was a super fun read. And then the last book I read, I just finished it today, Girl on a Wire. This is another one that I thought was a YA book because the character is 16, but it definitely reads more like a middle grade novel, and it's about this girl whose family is circus performers. It was just super fun. I love books about the circus, and so it was a really fun one about like someone's like, there's like this curse, you know, quote on their family, and all these crazy things happen, and she's trying to figure out like how to fix it, how to solve it, how to keep everybody safe. So it was a really fun book, but definitely more younger grade than.
What
like
year did that take place?
It's contemporary. This one is contemporary.
Oh, okay.
So,
because I like reading books about the circus too, but I like reading them like when they're long ago, when they were like kind of creepy,
right,
and like dangerous.
This one definitely has those vibes. I kept thinking that it was taking place in like the 50s, but then like I'd be reminded that it wasn't because somebody answered their cell phone. So. So that was my own. I gave this one 3 stars. It was definitely a good book, but like I said, it was not a YA novel. It was definitely more like that 4th, 5th grade reading level. So I just feel like it was not marketed to the proper audience. So Shawna, did you read a ton of books like I did this month? Because
wow. I don't know how to follow that.
Well, I feel like we should tell the listeners, though, that I was like, I don't think I'm going to talk about all of these.
Yeah. And I was like, no, you have to. That's amazing. Because
so many.
Sometimes, some months you might read a ton of books, and some months you might read 4, and both, that's okay. Like, you go through different seasons of your life. I probably will not ever read 20 books in a month because I have 4 kids under the age of 7, and my reading time is limited, but I did read, I think I have, how many on my list? 10. So I'm pretty.
This is an impressive number of books.
I'm happy with that. So let's see, what do I have pictures of? The first one we'll go into is Mr. Dickens and His Carol, and this is by Samantha Silva. I believe this is her debut novel as well. Yes, it is. So this one, I really have no idea why I read this one now. We're not anywhere near Christmas, and this is obviously about his book, A Christmas Carol. But what was interesting was, so this is a fictional story around obviously real characters. She uses other characters in the book that are real characters in this time and real events that happened around Charles Dickens' life. But the story is fiction of how A Christmas Carol came to be. So basically he was on this high about, you know, I'm doing so great, and his publishers come to him and they say, all right, your last book basically tanked. If you don't write another good one, you're done and you owe us a ton of money. And he's like, okay, well, you know, I'll figure something out. And they said, no, we need a Christmas book this Christmas. And he's like, it's November. And they're like, we need your best work of art this Christmas. I gave it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. If it had been kind of more true events about how that story came to be, hands down, it would have been 5 stars. My next one is Night by Ellie Weisel. I don't have that with me because I loaned it to my mom. That is Elie Wiesel's true account, his story about being in the concentration camps during World War II. It is a very quick read, a very short book, but there is a lot in that book. So this is a 5-star book all the way, very descriptive, one of the best books on the concentration camps that I have read. And it's really weird to say one of the best when you're talking about that kind of situation, you know? Moving on with the World War II theme, we have this book. This is At the Wolf's Table. This is by Rosella Postorino. It is a translated book written first in Italian. The cover is amazing.
Yeah.
It almost has...
I've seen it.
Yeah, it almost has a
like
fairy tale look
I've,
to it.
Wanted to read it. Yeah.
Yeah, like she's wearing this blue dress, kind of looks like Alice in Wonderland. She's holding this apple, kind of like Snow White, which what this book is about are these ladies who are chosen to be Hitler's taste testers for his food. So I think it's interesting she's holding this apple, like that Snow White fantasy or fairy tale. And so they sit at this table, they eat the food, and then they basically wait for an hour to see if anybody dies. So there's this period of time when they're just kind of looking at each other, but they're eating this amazing food because everything is rationed at that time. And so, but they're getting this lavish, like, desserts and all of these wonderful things. But it could kill you. And so you would think that that sounds like a great premise for a story. And this is actually based on a true story. One of the most boringest books I have ever read in my entire life.
Oh, no.
So incredibly boring. And I was so upset. It was so slow moving. They just talked so much about, I can't even explain it because it was just nothing. And I happened to, like, coincidentally be co-reading it with a friend of mine. And she was listening to it on audiobook. So we would go back and forth talking, and I'm like, well, maybe it's better on audiobook. And she said, oh, well, I was hoping maybe it was better in the book. And I was like, no, so it's really not going anywhere on both forms.
It's not good.
And literally the only reason why I finished it is because she was reading it too, and we were just kind of pulling ourselves through it. And by the end, I was just like, I can't not finish it because I have like 50 pages left, but I so wanted to not finish it. And when I read those 50 pages and like nothing happened, yeah, I just was like, I should not have read this. So I'm very disappointed in that. Then
Bad day.
Yeah, bad. So then I went just totally randomly. The next book I read was Save Me From Myself. And it Saved Me From Myself, How I Found God Quit Korn, K-O-R-N, the band, Kicked Drugs, and Lived to Tell My Story. And that's by Brian Welch, who is the guitar player for the band Korn. Okay. And so this is kind of his memoir, and all of these things that he does that are just terrible. Like, terrible, drugs, drinking, abuse. He has a daughter, totally doesn't pay any attention to her. He's not a great dad. And then he gives his life over to God, and he's starting to see how his life is going, and he, it's not going anywhere, basically. And so he starts pulling himself out of this, like, out of the mud, but he's still falling, which I think it's great that he put that in there. He didn't just say, I found God and everything was great. He kept falling back and he kept making mistakes, but every time he got further and further out of the darkness. And so I thought it was pretty motivating. It was pretty good to, see how his life was. The criticism I have, I gave it 3 stars, was he got to this point where he really turned his life around, and I was rooting for him. And then it was like he went really far, and I think got caught up with some people who took advantage of who he was and the money that they could potentially get from him. So I don't know where the story went after that. So I'm hoping that everything is all right with Mr. Brian Welch. So it was a 3. It wasn't anything like, I don't know. I gave it 3. Moving on. The next one, number 5, Picking Cotton. This is another memoir. This is by Jennifer Thompson, Canino, and Ronald Cotton, who are the 2 main people in the story. It's also with Aaron Tornio, who I think is the one that kind of put the book together. But so this book, Picking Cotton, is about a girl who was sexually assaulted, and when she was very young, I think it was early 20s. And so she went to the police station, and they lined up a bunch of guys. And so she was Caucasian woman. All the men are African American. And they say, who is it? And she picks the guy, and they say, are you sure? And she said, absolutely, basically. And so they throw him in jail. And the reason I say their color is because you can tell in the book there was a very race-related thing about it. Like, okay, well, we have this white woman. She picked her, black man, and we did our town good with, this situation. And so it's just that very classic racial thing. Like, we're not going to really go much into it because, she's obviously right, So they find out 10 years later that that's not the man that assaulted her. And he has proclaimed his innocence this whole time. Yeah. And so then he gets out of prison, and it's about their relationship through that and after that and the bond that they formed. It is an incredible story of redemption, forgiveness, and absolutely amazing and heart-wrenching to be reading it, hearing the story, seeing what he's going through this whole time, and knowing he's not the guy. It's absolutely amazing. Okay, moving on. The Good Neighbor, The Life and Work of Fred Rogers by Maxwell King. I can't.
We love him, Mr. Rogers.
I cannot recommend this book enough. I had no idea all the layers of Fred Rogers, and I'm sure it doesn't even go into all of them in this book. Fantastic. I didn't know that much about him. I didn't know how intelligent and how schooled and educated and amazing he was, and how everything he did his entire life revolved around children and making the world a better place for children, and how passionate he was about that. It was so fantastic. I kept waiting for something to happen, but he was a closet alcoholic. You know how there's always that thing right. that happens. And I'm like, please don't ruin Mr. Rogers for me. But it wasn't. He was amazing. And the people that, they were saying the only time we've ever seen him so angry is when he felt like somebody was not caring for the children the way that they should have. So he even worked with hospitals on how to take care of children when they take them away from their families to do, surgeries or operations or things like that, because his own son was ripped away from him in the hospital, screaming for him, screaming, "Daddy, Daddy," and he couldn't do anything about it. And he was just tormented for years. He went to therapy over that. And so he worked with hospitals so that other parents wouldn't have to go through things like that. So, incredible man. And I didn't know this. He came from one of the wealthiest families in Pennsylvania.
Interesting.
So incredibly wealthy. They had butlers and maids, and he didn't want anything to do with money. And so even in his later life, they just lived in this very modest, I can't remember, it might have been an apartment or something. And he never lived the lavish lifestyle that he obviously could have. He gave everything he could to children. So I thought that was fantastic. Next, Molokai. I don't have this book because I lent it to my mom. Molokai, I read this because I lived in Hawaii for 6 years. This book is about the leper colony that they have on Molokai. And I've known about it, but I wanted to know more by reading this book. And so the main character was a fictional character, but he took stories from people that he had interviewed and everything and kind of integrated them into the book. And when I first read this, I was very annoyed at some of the things that were put into the book because I didn't think it was necessary. or that it really fit the time period. So that kind of overshadowed the book for me. If we took that out, I thought it was phenomenal. I love the description of the colony. It was heart-wrenching to know that the story is about this little 7-year-old girl that's ripped from her family because she's showing signs of leprosy, thrown on a boat over to the island. Everybody knows that basically you're going there to die. This is in the late 1800s. And so the family just sees their little baby getting on this boat and they can't do anything about it. But the story is great because it's about creating a new life. So she was able to go over there, and she was there for many, many years and building her own life there. But the other thing too about this is there's nothing short of terrible things that happen to her. So I was just like, what else wrong could happen to this poor woman? So I would recommend that book. It really is a wonderful history to know. A lot of people don't know about that history. The next one is The Silent Patient. This one I got in my Book of the Month Club box. This is by Alex Michaelides, maybe. Again, not a book that I would typically read. This is kind of that thriller murder mystery. A woman shoots her husband. The cops come in. She doesn't say anything, and she doesn't say anything for 6 years. She doesn't say a word. And so they're trying to figure out what happened, so they don't put her in jail because she's obviously got these mental issues, but nobody can get through to her. So it's just about finding out what happens, and at the end, it's just, that suspenseful ending. So I thought that was really great. I think I gave it 4 stars. The next one, The Storied Life of A.J. Fickery, and this is by Gabrielle Zevin. And this was, I just randomly read this one. I thought it was amazing. 5 stars. I think that was kind of like a cozy contemporary, which is really weird because I don't really read that. And it was very bookish. And it's about this guy who's very grumpy. He lost his wife and he owns a bookstore. And then all of a sudden, there's a baby in his bookstore. And there's a note pinned to the baby that says, please raise her loving to read, basically. And so he's like, what do I do with a baby? And so there's times when I'm like, I don't know if I should cry or be angry or, so emotional. But the book is great. I highly recommend it. My last book is called Tell Me 3 Things. This is a YA book. And this is by Julie Buxbaum. This was so fun. So it takes place in high school, which I haven't read a high school book in a long time. And it's about this girl who moves to a new state with her family because her mom dies. The dad gets remarried, so they move. And on her first day of school, she gets an email from an anonymous guy that says, I will help you through this school because it's tough. I'll tell you who to be friends with, who to stay away from. Just don't ask who I am. And so this kind of anonymous person is texting and emailing her, and she's trying to figure out who he is. And so that's kind of how the book goes. And then who is it at the end? Who is it going to be? And yeah, I thought it was so much fun. I would give that 5 stars. But yeah, so those are my books. I tried to go as fast as possible. I feel like we have so many books this month.
Well, and in my mind, before we started, I was like, I'm only going to say like one thing about each book, but it's hard.
It's so hard.
When you're like, holding it up and you're like, oh wait, but I remember like all these things about
I know. So we are so sorry that this is long, but we have to talk about the books that we read. So Liz, let's go back to you with what are you currently reading? And also what I want to know is, of the books that you read this month, what is your pick of the month and what is your skip of the month?
All right. So I'm currently reading, I actually just started both of them today, because I just finished both my book and my audiobook today. I just started, it's so far away from me, The Library Book by Susan Orlean. This came in Book of the Month last month, I think. And I'm really excited. It's not my typical read, and I am excited to hear all about when the Los Angeles Library burned. So if you guys aren't familiar with this, it takes place, the Los Angeles, the main branch of the Los Angeles library burned. There was a fire there the same day as Chernobyl. And so it didn't really get any press because there was this massive catastrophe that was so much more important than like these 450,000 books that were destroyed. I know, it was this massive part of their library, but nobody really knew about it because something so much more catastrophic was happening at the same time. And so Susan Orlean did research, and so this is actually a nonfiction book. I think it's going to end up reading more like a memoir. Like I said, I just barely started it today. So I'm really excited to get into this one and to, read a little bit less YA fantasy, but I can't not read any YA fantasy. And so I started listening to Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire today on audio. So that's another reread for me, but I haven't ever listened to any of the audiobooks except for the first one. And we all know Jim Dale is a master at reading those books and doing all the voices. So I'm excited to listen to some things that aren't that first one. So my pick of the month. This is like choosing a favorite again.
I know. Especially when you've read so many this month.
I know, but I'm pretty sure my pick of the month is going to be The Gilded Wolves. It was so good. I highly recommend it, especially if you like YA fantasy. And I didn't say this before when I was talking about it, but the characters are very diverse, not just like ethnically diverse, but like one of the characters seems kind of autistic. Actually, two of the characters kind of seem like they're maybe on that spectrum. And so I really liked how those characters were brought in and they just had like all these quirks, but it wasn't like, the book wasn't about like, oh, like they're this different person and we're just nice to them. Like they were a character in the book. And I really loved the diversity of these characters. My skip of the month. Wow. I mean, I'm turning my books around so I can see them here. My skip of the month, like, definitely Damsel is a skip. Like, I didn't enjoy that book at all. But I also didn't finish reading it. And so I feel like that can't be my skip of the month because I did not read the whole thing. So I think my skip of the month will actually be Girl on a Wire.
Oh,
just
wow.
because, I mean, it was a good book, but again, I feel like part of a book is knowing who the book is for. And that's not the author's job. That's usually the publisher's job. But it was definitely like promoted as a YA novel, but it's not, I would not say this is appealing to YA audiences. This is definitely more appealing. It's just too young. The whole book just reads too young. Whereas I think if they would have said, this is a great book for fourth graders, it would have been a great book for fourth graders, and I would have maybe enjoyed it more. So those are my currently reading, my pick and my skip. So what are yours?
So what I am currently reading, I have a current read and a current listen. My current listen is called I'm looking at it. Sorry, guys. Life with My Idiot Family. A true story of survival, courage, and justice over childhood sexual abuse.
Oh.
Yeah. The title really throws you off because it's such a cheeky, thing. By Kathy and Gary Picard. And so this is it won the Reader's Favorite Book Award. It's basically what it says. And the audio is read by her. It's not the best read. It's not the best listen. I give her a little bit of leniency because she is the author. This is her story. But at the same time, if you can't get past listening to not a good quality audio, you might want to read it instead of listening. Like you can hear the pages turning. When she messes up a word, that's in there. There's no fluctuation in the voice. It's just a very meek read. But again, I just try to give her a little bit of leniency because that is her book. So it's just what it says. It's about her overcoming her own past. But what she does is she went in to try to change the system because the laws were basically in favor of the abuser. You have this many years to report the abuse. If it's past that, there's nothing we can do. So there's some people, especially when you are maybe young and abused, you aren't ready to handle that till maybe even decades later. By then it's too late. So she was going in saying, we need to change this. It should never be too late for someone to name their accuser and for that accuser to be punished, you know? So that's where I am kind of right now, where she's trying to get into, you know, her senators and all of that stuff. So it's very interesting. I have no idea how I got a hold of that book. I don't know where it came from.
Right.
I don't know.
I was just going to ask, like, did someone recommend this?
I don't even remember getting it on Audible. It was there, and I was like, oh, what? Let me just read this. And I was like, I don't even remember getting this, but it's not bad. So the one that I'm reading, I actually just started this because I finished Tell Me Three Things like yesterday. So the one I decided to start next is called The Day the World Came to Town, 9/11 in Gander, Newfoundland.
Oh.
So this is like the town's stories on what happened that day on September 11th, 2001, when all of these planes were redirected to this small town in Gander, Newfoundland, and how the town basically stopped everything they were doing to house these people. Stores were opened up to them, and they just welcomed this influx of people who had nowhere else to go. Yeah. And I'm so excited to read this because it's this town, the way they speak of this town is they're the people that will give you the shirt off their back. And it said you'll have a lot of tears, but it's not for the sadness. It's for the joy and the love that was given to everybody. So that's what I'm currently reading and listening to. So my pick of the month, I feel like this is not a surprise. It has to be The Good Neighbor, the life and work of Fred Rogers. Just as a mom and as a homeschool mom and somebody who just loves focusing on children and treating them like human beings and not a child. You know, we are growing adults. We're shaping how they feel about themselves, you know, how we treat them when they're young. And I think that he was just brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So I would recommend that to absolutely everybody, whether you have children or not. It's just fantastic. And I can't wait for the movie with Tom Hanks playing Fred Rogers.
Yes.
I can't think of anybody else who might be able to portray him better than Tom Hanks.
No, I don't think so either. Tom Hanks, I feel like he does such a good job of embodying his character.
Yes.
And like after they cast him, I was like, he kind of looks like Mr. Rogers.
Right? I know. I just love it. All right. So my skip, this is just easy. Let me grab it here. At the Wolf's Table. Skip it. Don't waste your time. Just skip it. I'm so sad that I have to say that. But it was one of those I just wish I would have not finished. I'm going to keep it on my shelf because I think it's a beautiful cover. I will recommend this to no one. So, those are my skips and picks and what I'm reading now. Again, guys, I don't think we meant to go this long, but when talking about the books we've read, what are you going to do?
We're just excited. Now, you guys definitely want to tune in next week because we are going to have our very first guest, and we are so excited. So you definitely want to join us. Well, we hope you join us every week, but next week is going to be super special.
Absolutely. Tiffany will be with us, and she's going to tell us all about what it means to run a literary society and give us tips and tricks on how to create and run our own, which I am just so excited for. So make sure that you join us next week for that interview with Tiffany. And as for Liz and I, we will talk to you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed hanging out with us.
Don't forget to check us out on social media and subscribe to our podcast so you don't miss out on any of the fun.
See you next week.